Welcome to today's webinar, Preparing for Your Content Knowledge Certification Exams. My name is Tracy Vasquez and I'm here at Grand Canyon University in the College of Education, and today we will be discussing exam preparation strategies. This webinar is being recorded, so my voice on the recording as well as any questions that are asked will be kept, and this recording will be shared on our Professional Learning Network. Currently, all attendees are muted, and that is to help eliminate background noise. However, if you do have a question or a comment or would like to participate during the webinar, please raise the hand icon next to your name, and I will be able to unmute you so that you can address the group. You can also type in the questions box below. I'd like to start out with a little scripture. This is from Philippians. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. Okay, our agenda for today, we will be going over teacher candidate educator exams, discussing what you need to study, how you learn best. We will be selecting exam preparation tools. Some tips regarding failing to plan is planning to fail, and success on educator examinations. So as we get into the nuts and bolts of this, I would like to share with you how our College of Education philosophy is very closely interwoven with our philosophy for content knowledge exam preparation. So the College of Education approach of exams and testing is aligned with the conceptual framework of learning, leading, and serving. It is a way to help demonstrate and guide our teacher candidates through coursework preparation and knowledge competencies. And so we expect that as our teacher candidates progress through coursework and clinical practice experiences, their level of subject knowledge comprehension increases, along with associated professional knowledge and pedagogical knowledge, and they reach that acceptable level of beginning teacher preparation. So in this webinar, we will be focusing on three aspects of preparing for certification exams, and that is that you are intentional in your dedication and preparation, that you read through this module in its entirety, and that you think through and develop a personalized plan for test preparation. So it is important to know that there are several different exam types when it comes to certification exams. And your required exams may be a combination of the following. There is a basic skills exam that's taken in some states that covers basic levels of competency for reading, writing, and math. This is not a requirement in Arizona, but if you are in a state that requires a basic skills exam, you will typically take this very early on in your program, because your program coursework is not going to cover the content that you will be tested on. These are basic levels of reading, writing, and math that you would typically have learned throughout your K-12 schooling. The next type of exam is a content or subject knowledge exam, and this type of exam tests your content area of expertise or the knowledge that you will be teaching to your classroom students. So if you are going to be a secondary math teacher, your content or subject knowledge is going to be that high school math. Now, if you are planning on being an elementary school teacher, then your content or subject knowledge is going to be those core subject areas that elementary school teachers teach. So it won't just be one subject. It will typically be 4 or 5 subject areas combined into a multiple subjects exam. And in some states, you'll see this referred to as a content exam, and in other states, you'll see it referred to as a subject knowledge exam. It's still testing the same thing, that content area of expertise. And the third type of exam that could be required of you is a professional knowledge exam, and this tests your pedagogical knowledge, the knowledge that you've learned throughout your program about how to teach. This information would have been covered in your methods courses that are typically taken towards the end of your program, junior and senior year. Oftentimes, this is tested through an exam similar to the basic skills or content knowledge exam, where you go to a testing center and you sit down at a computer and you take a test. But other times, professional knowledge exams can be tested as an assessment. And what that means is there's a very particular set of instructions candidates have to follow to put together a portfolio to submit for scoring. So it's not an option, it's not an either-or exam or assessment. It depends on what the state requires in your area. So that is important to know, that in your area, your testing may be slightly different than another peer in your same program. All exams are determined based upon the state Department of Education, where you'll be receiving your certification through. So you can begin early on in your program to start making preparations for your own state certification and understand which tests are required and what topics will be tested on those exams. There are several different exam providers. So, for example, teacher candidates in Arizona are primarily preparing to take the NES series of exams. NES would be the exam provider. There are other states that take other state-specific exams, or another very common exam provider is the ETS series. They create the Praxis and the GACE and additional exams, of course. So you will want to learn about the required exams in your state and then who those exam providers are. And agreed, this can sometimes be a bit overwhelming with understanding all of the required tests and the content that will be covered on those exams. So we do have a team here at Grand Canyon University who are assigned regionally, so they can help you with the regional requirements that you'll be working towards as a teacher candidate. This is our GCU Field Experience Counselor team. These counselors also work with you on other programmatic requirements, such as clinical practice and internship requirements, but they certainly can help you with exam identification. Now, what you need to study. So when you're thinking about what to study, it is important to determine first the correct exam. So to make your exam selection, you'll first go to your online State Department of Education website, and you'll look at initial teaching certification requirements, and there you will see the required exams. Likely there will be links to the exam provider's webpage, and when you're on that exam provider webpage, you'll also be able to see maybe some practice questions and additional preparation materials. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. This is our candidate certification exam personalized study plan. This will help you organize all of the information that you need as you begin this preparation period prior to taking your certification exam. We'll be going through these today. The test framework, competencies, and objectives designate the actual content that will be covered on the test. It also allows you to take a look at the percentage of questions that will be from each domain. So for example, if your content exam is covering English language arts and social studies, you'll want to know which percentage of questions will cover which part of the exam. So if our primary portion of the test is on English language arts, you'll want to spend more time studying that domain area than you will the social studies components. So you can begin by looking at the broad domain areas that will be covered on the test, and then you can start looking at more specific details of the content, moving to the competencies and objectives. So I'll take a peek here with you on the NES test framework. So when you want to read the test framework, competencies, and objectives, and you're studying for an NES exam, you'll be relying upon the test framework. However, if you are using an ETS series of exams, it's not called a test framework, it's called a study companion. It's still the same information. It will cover the competencies and objectives, as well as the percentage of questions that will be from each domain. So we'll go ahead and show you the NES test framework. And once you're on the NES exam provider webpage, you'll move to Tests, and you'll select the test that you're preparing for. You'll see first basic skills are listed, and then professional knowledge exams are listed, and then it moves on to the subject or content knowledge exams. So once you select the test, on the right-hand side, you can click on Preparation Materials. And then about halfway down, you'll see the test framework. You can go ahead and click on that. And then you'll see the domain areas. These are broad domain areas. Mathematics. Well, we know we need to study mathematics, but what exactly? That's where you scroll down, and you can see that the competencies and then the objective statements are written much more specifically. Also, at the top of this test framework, you'll see not only do you receive the domain, the range of competencies, but you also receive approximate percentage of test score. So 50% of the test score will come from your performance on competencies 1 through 4 that are part of the mathematics content domain. So the reason we want to carefully review that test framework and use it often as we're going through our preparation period is because we know that from exam content comes exam questions. You can also review sample questions. If you go back to that exam provider site, we'll go ahead and select an exam. This time let's look at subtest 1. And if you scroll down, you'll see the percentage of test score that comes from each domain, 62% from reading and English language arts, and 38% from social studies. It also shows us that in the table below the chart. But if you click on these domain areas, you'll see that now we have a web form version of that test framework where we can see the domains and the individual competencies. And if we click on those competencies, we get a breakdown of the individual objective statements. And then also, underneath those statements, we receive a sample item. A young child says, "I drawed you a picture." The error in this sentence best illustrates which process of language development. Let's look at those responses. A, overgeneralization of morphological rules. B, incorrect use of pronoun reference. Well, the only pronoun in there is I and you, and it doesn't seem like those are incorrect. So C, overextension of the meaning of nouns. I think the nouns are okay in this sentence. Confusion of past and future tenses. Well, that could be, but is it future? That seems like that's not correct. So possibly A. A, this question requires the examinee to demonstrate knowledge of a foundational concept relating to English language acquisition, applying the regular past tense inflection ed to verbs that have an irregular past form is an example of overgeneralizing a morphological rule, an error typical of a particular stage of language development. So you can see answering this type of sample question can be helpful and give you a general idea of how well you would perform with competency 001. However, this sample item is only representative of one small piece of the listed descriptive statements. So you can see there's many other ways questions can be represented from the descriptive statements listed here. So studying simply from the sample items would not be a smart way to study because we know test questions come from the test content, not from sample items. Okay, we've had a question come in. Someone is in our elementary and special ed program. Do they need to study for both tests? Yes, you do. Okay, let's go on here. Begin your personalized study plan. So that was the chart that I showed you a bit earlier. Remember, you're going to start by revisiting your State Department of Education website. Follow the links to your state-required testing company, which is your exam provider, such as NES. And once on the exam provider site, find the content knowledge exam that is aligned with your program of study. Or if you're dual, as we just mentioned, you will need multiple content exams. Ensure the correct test is written across the top row of your personalized study plan. And then also on that study plan, you'll have an opportunity to document the test center you plan on visiting. Sometimes you do need to book well in advance for when you plan on taking your exam at the specific test center. So it's good to have that planned out in advance. You also want to think through what would be a good date and time that would be reasonable for you to prepare for your exam. A preparation for the exam does take a minimum of 12 weeks. So when you register for your exam, you can write the test center and the test date information on your personalized study plan. You can also locate the competencies and objectives, like I just showed you through the exam framework or the study companion. And once you have these competencies and objectives located, you can include these with your personalized study plan. I also suggest that you reflect on your comfort level with the content for each of these competencies and objectives. Think through what are going to be the areas that you need to focus your studies on prior to taking your exam. What could be challenges? Notate that so that you can start moving towards a focus in your preparations. So I stated earlier it does take about 12 weeks to study for an exam. That's with an estimate of 7 to 10 hours per week, so about an hour per day. So think through what days and times would work best for you. Work it into your schedule. Maybe you'll study from 7 to 8 a.m. every morning or 9 to 10 p.m. every evening. Whatever's going to work best in your schedule, but if you actually plan it into your routine, then there'll be less likely of a chance that you will either forget or overbook yourself so that you won't have time to make it to study for that day. So write into your personalized study plan with the days and times that you plan on studying. A problem that many students have is that they don't know how to divide their time in a proper way. They spend way too much time on a small part of the topics that are covered on the exam. Remember to get through that test framework or study companion. There's a lot included on there. You do want to prioritize, but you also want to divide up your study into sessions. You can create different tasks that can be accomplished individually, and these tasks will then cover all of the material that you have to study. Each day, do some of the tasks in your schedule and check them off, but make sure you're realistic. You can see that it will become much easier to start tracking your progress this way. You'll see what you've done well and what you've learned successfully. Then you're also avoiding the problem of trying to do everything that you've already done in the previous day. So if you have an idea of how much time it takes to do a task, you'll have a much better chance of being realistic and accomplishing it in a timely manner. And that way you can build a pattern of success in your preparation routine so that you are getting through all the content you need to study. We have a question here. Are all of the test questions the same points? Yes. All of the questions are weighted the same. However, there's sometimes more questions aligned with a particular domain. So, for example, we know that for the exam I just showed you, math is much more heavily scored because there are more math questions on the test. So while the math question may earn the same points as a social studies question, there are more math questions. Therefore, more of the score will come from your performance on the math. So hopefully that's clear. I also want to take a minute to discuss a study environment. Oftentimes students will think it's a great time and place to study at 9 to 10 a.m. in Starbucks. Well, they get to see all of their friends, and it could be great for the social aspect. It's not going to be a great place to study because there will be a lot of distractions. The same goes for if you're studying 9 to 10 p.m. and you decide to study laying in bed or on the couch, you could fall asleep, and that is also a distraction. I like to recommend that a study area have a nice sturdy chair where you can sit up properly, and then you also have a window with some good natural lighting to help keep you awake. So as you consider where you will prepare for the exam, you can document this on your personalized study plan. So let's talk about what strategies you can use while you study to help you succeed on your content exam. A good strategy when you are choosing to study for a lengthy exam such as this is to align your study methods with your learning style. So you may already know your learning style, but thinking about it in reference to studying for an exam, I'm going to read you a few questions. Go ahead and think through how you would respond to these. How do I learn best? Do I require a quiet space to study? Do I prefer to read information first and then try to apply it? Do I work best at a task in large or small chunks? So we'll use the next few slides here to reflect on your own preferred learning style and help you think through some preparation methods that will match your preferred learning style and that will make the preparation process intuitive and manageable for you. And then once you have some ideas on your own learning style, you will be able to document these on your personalized study plan. So let's get to know your learning style. You may see your learning style mentioned here, or yours may be a combination of several of these learning styles. We find that kinesthetic learners like to associate movements with words, and you may think this would be difficult with preparing for a content exam because you're not necessarily going to stand up in the testing center and start your movements. But we do find that those movements can help you remember the content, and then you might just need a verbal cue to help you remember it on test day. Or with our kinesthetic learners, we find that you can study walking on a treadmill or doing some sort of stationary bike, and that way the movement itself just helps you learn the material. Personally, I find that I'm more of a visual spatial learner. I benefit from when I'm learning the content, I make the thinking maps, and then I can revisit them for quick reviews later on. And that way I have that visual picture of how the information is organized, and I can remember that for test taking. But hopefully you can see your learning style listed here, and you can make note of some of the strategies you can use. Another more general tip is to read in your subject area. Remember, this is your subject area of expertise. You need to be very familiar with the language that is used. You'll find that it's easier to read through the exam questions as well as the proposed answers if you're familiar with the language. So you can seek out books, magazines, websites, and online forums to practice communicating topics in your subject area. You may also want to meet with a colleague who's already teaching in that field. That will also help you learn the language. Another great strategy is strength in numbers. So you can study with a partner or group in person or virtually. There are many online video chat and teleconference tools that you can use to study with groups virtually across the country. Just make sure you are studying with people who are preparing for the same exam as you. Not only the same exam provider, but also the same exam. So same test name and number. You know, people understand things differently, so talking with someone else will help you get a better grasp of the content. Also, they may have had different teachers than you and may have learned a better strategy. And also, we know that encouragement or support from your peers can be helpful. Another strategy is the use of flashcards. So depending on what you are trying to learn, flashcards could be a good option for you. Also consider your learning style. These are particularly helpful when you're studying a content area where there's a lot of complex vocabulary words that you really need to drill to learn them. You can use the blank index cards that you can buy at any office supply store, or you can use an electronic flashcard tool, such as the ones I have in the upper right-hand corner, Flashcards Plus, Study Blue, Chegg Flashcards, Evernote Peak, or Google Docs. You can use all of these on a tablet or notebook that you can take with you and study virtually. Okay, mnemonics can be a good strategy. These are great for remembering lists and procedures. You've all heard the mnemonic, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, or parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract. These could be helpful for you depending on your content area. Just make sure you don't have too many mnemonics to remember, as then those could be difficult to remember as well. Okay, before we go on to selecting resources, we'll go ahead and see if there's any questions on the content we've covered so far. Deborah, I just sent you the audio pin, so hopefully you're able to enter that so that you can participate. Are there any other questions on what we've covered so far? Okay, Deborah, I'm not going to be able to unmute you until you enter the audio pin. Okay, we're going to go on. So we talked about the certification examination companies. These are your exam providers. And I did show you where you can look at the content that would be covered on the exam, listed as a web form and also as a PDF document that you can download. But I want to show you a few additional materials that you can retrieve from that exam provider's site. So go ahead and select the test. And then select preparation materials. And here you'll see there's general information about the structure of the test and testing tips. You can also read through video tutorials, how to prepare, Pearson Professional Centers Tour. This can be helpful if you have anxiety about test taking and you want to see the layout of the test taking center before you actually go. You can take the tour there. All the test centers are laid out the same way. And there's also computer-based testing tutorials, so you know what to expect on the computer screen. And then there's some materials available here for purchase. There is an Elementary Education Subtest 1 practice test. Keep in mind, this test is not going to be used as a study tool. It's only going to give you a rough estimate of how well you would perform on the actual test. You won't be able to see the actual questions you got wrong and the right answer for those. You can also purchase a comprehensive study guide. This I would recommend. Many of the teacher candidates I've worked with have purchased this study guide. However, keep in mind if you are in our elementary program, you do need to take subtest 1 and subtest 2. So you may need to purchase a study guide for each subtest. so it's certainly not required. So once you know your learning style, and you know your preferences, and you know what's available from the exam provider, now you can start to look at some other study materials that you can gather. You may use lecture notes, textbooks, journals, homework assignments, review papers, or reputable websites. These are just a few examples. You certainly can look anywhere else for study materials. You just don't want too many study materials. You want them to be really honed in on what will be tested on that test framework or study companion. Also, GCU does offer candidate resources. We offer these through our online learning lounge. If you are going to take advantage of those resources, make sure that you are already very familiar with your test framework and you know exactly which areas you need support in, that you don't go in asking for help on everything, because as you know, these tutoring sessions are limited in time and you will only be able to cover a short bit of objectives in each study session. So make sure you go in with a plan and you're focused, and that will enable you to get the most out of each study session. And these are the steps for how to register for the online tutoring for NES Elementary Content Knowledge Preparation. Okay, I also want to go over with you that you can access external websites for test preparation. If you go on to do a simple internet search on exam preparation, you'll find there are many, many companies that offer this, but be very careful. There are scams out there, and oftentimes you don't necessarily know what you're paying for. So if you are going to be using an external website, I suggest that you use free websites, not necessarily the ones that are focused on exam preparation, but the ones that focus on learning the content. So if you're familiar with your test framework and you know what content you need to learn, you can look for a resource particular for that topic. You don't necessarily need a full-blown exam preparation software. And remember to personalize your study plan. So remember that takes into consideration the timetable that you have, your learning preferences, and the resources that you will be using. So we have created a selecting resource materials chart to help you guide in this selection process. So you'll see this chart helps you think through resources as they pertain to your learning preferences and monetary preferences and time preferences. So as far as monetary preferences go, remember these exams can be expensive, so you certainly want to first reserve any funds that you have to take the exam. If you have additional money beyond that, you can reserve it for a potential retake if you need it. And then if you have additional money, you can save it for preparation materials, such as the study guide. So once you've thought through those questions, you can begin sorting your materials, come up with a smaller pile of materials that would actually work for you and that are very focused on the content that will be covered on the exam. So gather all of those resources that you're going to be using and make sure you put them on your device or in your study space so you'll be able to access them easily and you'll be able to keep them organized. I do want to say a few things about a practice test. I mentioned earlier how you can look on your exam provider's website on that test framework and look at the sample items. Sample items can be helpful. You can also use a practice test. So a practice test is often used if you do have test anxiety and you've not taken the test before and you want to have a general idea of how well you would perform. Don't take it at the beginning of your study period. Take it more towards the middle or end because you do want to have a good idea of how well you would perform. If you've already taken the exam, you will not need a practice test because you already are going to have a score report detailing all of your areas of strength and opportunity, and you'll be able to focus your studies from there. You do have to pay for a practice test, but it is less than the test cost. So if you are afraid of passing or afraid of failing, then you could take the practice test to give yourself a bit of confidence for a reduced price. So when you do receive the score report, you'll get a chance to see from domain areas how well you did in each domain area. You won't get to see actual questions that you got right or wrong. But you will see where there's opportunity for growth. Similarly, you can see that if you've taken the exam previously on your NES Score Report. So this is what is shown on the NES Score Report. The particular name and number of the test you took, your score, and the test date. Similar to the practice test, you also don't see the exact questions you got right or wrong, but you do have information on how well you did in each domain. So if you were the test taker and you did not take a practice test because you already have taken the exam previously, this is your score report from your prior attempt. Now this was a passing score, but if this was not a passing score, what are the areas you would recommend that be studied further prior to a second attempt? You can type in the questions box what you think. So if this test taker is going to have to retake this exam, oh, here we have a participant that says, all social studies and at least 004 from the language arts. Great. Someone else said, government and economics. Yes, I would definitely recommend both of those. 004 from Reading and English Language Arts because this test taker was in the 50th percentiles for the number of questions correct. That means there was 3 questions wrong. So almost half of the questions for 004 were wrong. So definitely the test taker is going to want to review that information and remember to view exactly what content he or she should be studying. You can reference the test framework and look at competency 004 and read through all of the objective statements. And then also social studies. So you can see in 6, 7, and 8, the percentage of questions correct were about half. So there is a lot of opportunity to review social studies. It could have been this test taker only studied reading English language arts prior to taking the test, because he or she knew that a primary portion of the test score was going to come from this domain area. But even though social studies was a smaller portion of the test, it is still vital to passing. This preparation log and reflection documentation can be used as you keep track during your preparation period of how much time you've put in. You can use each week column working down. So you put the dates for the week and then the number of hours you spend each day. So you may spend 1 hour Monday, number 2 Tuesday, you may spend 1 hour Wednesday, 1 hour Thursday, 0 Friday, 0 Saturday, 4 hours Sunday. So then you'll total that up at the bottom of the week and then move on to week 2. So this is going to be helpful as you're moving week to week so you can get a glance to make sure you're spending about the right amount of time each week. See if you're on track for your test day. So I would suggest you mark your calendar for the selected test date and count back 12 weeks and circle this date. And that date will be the start date of your focused preparation period. Week 1. So this tracking will help you ensure that you are putting in adequate preparation time and making the best use of your time, because you're going to analyze the use of your time using this reflection documentation. And this can be used at the end of each week. Ask yourself these questions. Document what area you improved upon, what area you know you need to work on more, what area you plan to focus on for next week, and what additions or alterations might you make to your preparations for next week. Failing to plan is planning to fail. Now this is important because we often talk about studying. Study, study, study. Now your preparation does take that study time. Time and tools. But then the reflection is also important. At the end of each day, at the end of each week, determine if those tools and the study schedule you're using need modification. Do you feel like you're advancing in your preparation? That's where strategy comes into play. Strategy involves you making personal decisions for yourself to determine the personalization of your preparation. Make those alterations as you need to. A question came in. Someone's asking about the chart. The chart I did show you in one of the earlier slides. I can also include that to you in an email. I'm going to be emailing you all with a copy of this presentation along with some of the materials referenced. I'm also going to send you some tips that we don't have time to get to today, as well as a survey on today's webinar. Okay, let's go on. I want to show you how this strategy can come into play for you. So to think through what your strategies will be, I have a couple of scenarios. Let's first look at John. John has researched the testing requirements for his state. He has already completed the Praxis 1 basic skills and received passing scores in all areas, reading, writing, and math. Next, he must pass the Praxis 2 elementary education multiple subjects exam. He knows this test is made up of individual subtests. Reading and math are both areas of strength for John, and he has scored highly on the pre-test for these areas. However, John has scored low on his pre-test in the area of social studies. After reviewing his study companion, which he downloaded from the Praxis website, he knows almost half of the questions for this social studies test will be about United States history, government, and citizenship. He decides this would be a good area to focus on initially. He reviews the objective in this test and sees he must know about exploration and colonization. John locates a lecture on TeacherTube, the first global age, exploration and colonization. After viewing the video, he feels more comfortable in this area. He also locates a freshman-level world history textbook in the local school library, which he reviews to get a bit more detail in this area. He is confident moving to the next objective, which includes the American Revolution and founding of the nation. So as you can see in John's scenario, he was able to use free materials from the Praxis website to obtain the content that he needs to study, and then he uses TeacherTube and the local library to obtain free resources to help hone in on those objective areas he knows he needs to focus on. Next, let's look at Jane. Jane has researched the testing requirements for her state. She is preparing for the NES Mathematics exam. After reviewing the test framework, she notices a large portion of the exam is on algebra. She feels this is an area of strength. To be certain, she reviews the objectives aligned with the algebra domain. She notices some academic vocabulary and terminology that seems unfamiliar. She first visits the mathwords.com website to review the terms she is unfamiliar with. Then she visits the Khan Academy site and the Purple Math website to increase her understanding of the concepts. Having started with the algebra topics, she jots down a few objectives in this area she would like to work on more tomorrow. She also plans to meet with a colleague to discuss algebra solutions. So as you heard about the scenarios of John and Jane, think about how you can use preparation, reflection, and strategy to personalize your preparations and make use of the resources that are out there free and available. Preparing for success does take focus and time. I suggest 3 to 6 months prior to the test administration date. And you can access a variety of preparation resources available online and through GCU to help you meeting the objectives that are listed on your test framework. And make sure you plan a reasonable timetable for yourself. So allow for preparation, practice, registration, test administration, and scoring. Now on the morning of the test, I have a few tips here for you. Make sure you know where you're going. Dress comfortably in layers. You can bring a snack. Make sure you avoid people who are anxious and overly nervous, because this might cause you to doubt your own knowledge. You want to make sure you go in there with that calm confidence that you have put in the preparation time, you have studied, and you are prepared. So good luck on your exam. I am going to email you with the materials referenced and a survey regarding this webinar. Good luck on your preparations and passing your exam. Don't forget to send your passing scores to your field experience counselor. Have a wonderful test day. Does anyone have any remaining questions before we wrap up our webinar for today? I don't see any hands. So thank you all for joining me and have a wonderful test day.